Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. Hey legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. You are joined today by Ayden and James Doumtsis, so we're back together. I must say I'm a little bit jealous that I got to miss out on last week's podcast. We've had a lot of really good feedback. It's obviously a pretty special time of year in the bush with the rut going on, so I know a lot of people have already put some of those tips and tactics and fundamentals to great use. We've had some messages come through on Instagram of people saying that they've taken a lot away from the podcast and they've been able to find game that they reckon they wouldn't have been able to find by putting some of those tactics to great use. So it's great to hear that feedback. We really do appreciate it. But on this week's episode, we're going to be touching on the next step of the process, I guess, and that is butchering. So once you've got the animal on the deck, what to do, how to get as much meat as possible, and utilize that in the best way going forward so that you can have a great eating experience in the kitchen. We're also going to dive into what sort of equipment you're going to need to make sure that you're fully ready to go once you've got that critter on the deck. But at the end of this podcast, we'll also be answering some listener FAQs. So if you've got any questions that you want answered here on the podcast or personally by Ayden and I, then make sure to email them through to info@twinelements.com.au with the subject line FAQ. Or you can simply send us a message on Instagram at Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, James Doumtsis Outdoors, or the Twin Elements Instagram. So make sure to send through those questions and we'll get them answered here on the podcast. But without further ado, let's jump in. We have recently teamed up with Day 6. They design and build specialised equipment for hunters. Their arrows and outsert combos are hunt ready straight out of the box. Head to their website to check them out today. Or for our Australian listeners, head to Venture Hunting and Outdoors, who stock the brand.
So when it comes to deciding, I guess, that you want to start eating wild game, that you're no longer just hunting and sort of leaving animals in the bush, there's obviously a lot of pre-hunt organisation that is required to make sure that you're later on delivering safe and quality table fare to your family, friends, whoever you're going to be consuming that meat with. There's obviously plenty of animals that we can hunt. We're very lucky here in Australia to have, rabbits, hares, feral pigs, goats, deer. There's so many different deer species, as well as buffalo, where we, can obviously assimilate that to our production and beef industry here. So I guess one of the biggest pre-hunt considerations is to know how to butcher, or at least get a rough idea on how to approach the process of butchering. And now there's plenty of, like with social media, obviously people can send us messages. Hopefully you can see some of our videos that we're going to be posting and have posted in the past as to how to butcher, what to look out for, different things like that. But I would honestly say that I think YouTube and DIY butchering videos are probably the best. That way you get a visual representation of exactly sort of, what you need to be doing and considering ahead of the job itself.
In terms of gear, really, there's a couple of different options that we sort of go flip back and forth with, and mainly around knives, and that's whether you've got a fixed blade knife, so the blade's not interchangeable, or something like a Havlon or an outdoor edge replaceable blade knife. So Ayden and I, we typically use the outdoor edge replaceable blade knives purely just because we really like that it's got that sort of spine. So unlike a Havlon, where, when you're putting it in a joint cavity or you're being a bit rough or whatever, sometimes it even gets caught up on sinew and fat and stuff like that and the blade comes off. We've just broken a lot of the Havlons, whereas because the outdoor edge knife has a spine, it doesn't really snap. The other thing that I really like about it is it's a nice length knife, like it's 3.5 inches or 3-inch blade, which just means that, it fits nice in your hand. You get a nice sort of efficient stroke, I guess, whereas some of the smaller scalpel blades and stuff that we've used in the past, like it does take quite a little bit longer when you are butchering. So that is our sort of go-to, just purely because we always know that we've then got sharp knives in your bag. Obviously, having the sharpest knife possible for butchering is super important, and going to make the job a lot quicker. So if you're someone that runs, a fixed blade in your bag, making sure that you've got those sharp knives is definitely something you need to be prepared for, especially if you're going to be going out on one of these meat missions, specifically going to get some meat for the freezer.
I guess the next thing to consider also is just always having, suitable, breathable game bags. And as we've discussed on previous podcast topics when we were discussing sort of gear guides and things like that, we like to assemble a little bit of a kill kit. We have for the last probably year or so now been running the Agali game bags. We just simply like them because they're quite good sizes. They've got medium, small, large. They're very breathable. And then they've got some good cord where you can actually wrap it around a branch. And once you've got like a leg or something hanging in there, it just allows for that leg and that meat to cool down in a nice, dry, temperate sort of environment as well. So another thing that we like to have in our meat kits, as well as like obviously the knives, as James mentioned, is a small foldable like saw, something like that, something that just fits in your hand. And some of those even have replaceable blades, just for cutting through ribs and bone, and it allows you to get that much more of the meat and cuts.
And if you are going on one of these meat missions, I guess, then the biggest thing obviously is having a plan on how you're actually going to get this meat home. So whether you've got like a Yeti filled with ice and that's where you're going to be storing your meat and taking that home, whether you've got a refrigeration set up or even a cool room, it's just important to have all this stuff planned out so that, when you do get the critter on the deck, especially if it's like a sort of allocated, like a meat hunt, I guess, whether it be with a bow or a rifle, or, just something to think about, because there's nothing worse than, this rut, you shoot a red stag or whatever, like there is a lot of meat on that, and just having like a 35 litre Yeti or something like that you normally just have your cans of beer in or whatever at the beach, like that's going to fit one back leg in it, for example. And if you haven't got ice in it, that you sort of stuff. So making sure that you've got this whole system, like all your gear ready to go, and what you're going to do with that meat once you've got that critter on the deck is something you definitely need to have planned out before you sort of hit the hills. So because there's nothing worse trying to organize something after the fact, especially if it's an afternoon hunt and you're walking out late, there's nothing worse than just having all the meat like sort of sitting there, and then you're left at midnight, for example, going, okay, well, am I just going to hang it for the night, or where's some refrigeration? Like, do I want to put it in? Do I want to take all the meat out? All the food out from my car fridge and put all the meat in? Like, it's stuff that you need to have lined up and ready to go before you actually hit the hills.
I guess one thing worth mentioning is even communication with your mates. Like, as hunters, we're often in a very good community in terms of there's always people wanting meat. There's always people happy to share in your success. And, if there's a set of antlers to go with the meat that you've acquired from this rut or raw, there'll be a mate that wants to just come over and help you break down that animal and, get the bones out of the meat, or break certain things into cuts and help you cryovac it, as we're going to talk about in a second. But I just, for example, the other day managed to shoot a couple of hinds with a good mate of mine, shot these chital deer for meat. And to be honest, things got pretty, we were just making the most of the situation up in Townsville. I've just recently moved there again, so I didn't actually have, the facilities to do it properly, but we made do, and we used my mate's office for a day just to hang the deer, and basically the aircon was pumping pretty cool, and that meat turned out beautiful, really nice and tender, and just allowing it to hang and some of that blood to continue dripping out of the meat, as well as just sit there in a nice cool environment and cool down properly before we chucked it straight in the freezer and cryovac'd it and all that type of stuff. Just made that finished product a little bit better. And then obviously, as you get more adept with, doing this butchering process, and you're finding more success, and your family starts to like the meat and things like that, it does go from just having, your normal fridge where you come back from a hunt, as James was saying, you're trying to move food out to put deer meat in or whatever. It does change to, you'll start having these conversations with your partner, or if you're at home by yourself or whatever, you'll start looking at, vertical spare fridges just to hang meat that you can turn on before a trip, turn off after a trip if you're unsuccessful. And then you'll go to like a bigger cool room, and then you'll go to the mate's cool room that can hang 6 whole deer in there and things like this. And it really does become a bit of a lifestyle once you realize how much meat there is and how great of a protein source this wild game can be.
The next step is actually, before I guess jumping back from Ayden's podcast last week, is deciding like when to pull the trigger and on what animal. Like in some ways, I'm just as picky with a trophy animal as I am with my meat animals, in the sense that, you want to pick an animal that obviously looks healthy. It's not skinny. It's not weak compared to other animals in the mob. Like, it's not covered in like lice or ticks or anything like that. Like, there's no obvious wounds, anything like that. Like, you really do want to do almost like an anti-mortem inspection of these animals, where you're trying to pick essentially the best doer or the best eater. Like, often, for example, like when it comes to pigs and stuff like that, like I'll shoot young boars over young sows and stuff like that, especially if they've got piglets, because obviously like that young boar is putting all of its energy reserves into, essentially getting fat, maybe walking the hills trying to find sows and stuff. Whereas that sow, she's got 10 little piglets, which you can look at as parasites, essentially sucking all the life out of her, and especially all the energy and stuff. Like, that little boar is going to be a lot better eater than that sow, for example. Same with goats and those type of things. Like, often I can't really stomach the taste of billies and stuff like that. So I obviously choose nannies. But even then, like, it's not just shooting a nanny, it's shooting the one that hasn't got a kid on it, for example, so it's in the best condition. Not to say that, we eat meat off everything that we shoot. So like, if we're, except for maybe like a rank old boar or something like that, that's way past its prime. But like if we're shooting fallow bucks or red stags and stuff, like, we take all the meat off them. And then the biggest thing about that is then what you actually do with the processing and how you actually cook it. That meat's still fine and tastes great, but it's like, if you're in a situation where you're specifically going out for, this meat mission where you're trying to actually just fill the freezer and stuff, or maybe feed family and friends, doing some of these pre-selections first to try and get the best quality animal is really important.
When jumping into the butchering process, so you've just taken an animal, and I guess it's always important to assess your shot and the impacts of like how the animal was killed. For example, if it was an efficient versus a prolonged death. So if that animal was heart or lung shot, it ran 30 meters up the hill and expired in seconds, and you're able to get up there after a little bit of time, giving it its time to expire properly, and then you're able to start getting to work and things like that, and drag it to a nice, cool, shady spot, and it's early in the morning still, then that's obviously going to be a lot better for the meat care as you go on through this process. Comparing that to if it's a prolonged death, for example, where, hunting, unfortunately, very realistically, we do unfortunately have, circumstances where things don't go right all the time. So if we do shoot something, say, a little bit far back, and we do go through the liver or the guts or something like that in the abdomen, there is a chance of meat contamination, as well as that animal running a little bit further than we would have liked, a little bit of a delayed, tracking job. So that animal and the urgency of having to, butcher it is going to be a lot more intense than an animal that, as I said earlier, in that first instance, drops dead in 30 meters, and you're able to start butchering it in the cool of morning in the shade, for example, straight away. So if you didn't get take from that, I always like to, if possible, move the animal to a nice shady spot. Unfortunately for us, they don't always die in a neat and accessible spot. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had to tie sambar deer, heads uphill and tie them to a tree just so they stop slipping down the hill. Same for elk. Like, for example, when James and I were butchering his big bull elk, we could barely even move the thing. So we just got to work starting on one side, in amongst trees and bushes and stuff like that. So you do have to make the most of your situation, but there are certain things that we can do. Say, for example, laying down a tarp underneath it, or like a little, I've got wet weather tarps that I'll lay underneath stuff. Or sometimes in the past, I've packed really cheap bed sheets, for example, just to separate your animal from the dirt and the environment. Can pay dividends as we go through this process. Cayuga broadheads are engineered for success and built by experience. These are the broadheads we trust for all of our bow hunts. Whether it's buffalo and bangtang bulls in Australia's Northern Territory or chital deer along the basalt wall, we have ultimate confidence in their range. I'm currently loving the 150 grain Zots. Regardless of your preferred broadhead, quality and performance is guaranteed across the range. If you would like to try them today or shoot them already and want to restock, head to their website and use code TWIN10. That's TWIN10 10 numerically at checkout for 10% off your next order. You will not be disappointed.
Now, some considerations that we sort of go through after we've shot an animal. So it depends, which we'll discuss in the future if we're doing, like for Ayden and I, whether we're doing the gutless method or the gutting method of butchering. So, but definitely recommend for any people starting out, just from an anatomy point of view and just getting your bearings and everything like that, like getting familiarized with all the anatomical organs and stuff like that. It helps with shot placements and everything as well. So, but what we always do is we examine the organs. So, we want to open it up and actually look at the liver and lungs, make sure there's no discoloration or like that. There's no abscesses, there's no signs of worms or anything like that. And just have a complete thorough look of all the intestinal organs and everything like that. Just make sure everything looks sort of what you'd expect. And it's sort of hard when this might be the first animal that you've ever opened up, for example. But you don't want to see any weird discolorations or, excessive hemorrhage or white dots or anything like that, or something that you think could be an abscess. And I guess what I would recommend doing is if in doubt, we generally say throw it out. So I wouldn't take meat, but what you could potentially do is take the meat out there and then take photos and then go and send it to someone. Hopefully you've got a hunting buddy with a bit more experience and you can send in a photo and be like, hey, is this normal, or is a video or something like that? Ayden and I have got honestly probably hundreds of these videos through Instagram and stuff while we've been hunting, obviously from a veterinary background. And we're going to do a couple of these podcasts. The next one's actually going to be on infectious causes and stuff in wild game, and how to make wild game safe. So stay tuned for that one next week. But we get messages all the time from people being like, hey, what is this? What is that? Because there's some truly fascinating things that we see in these animals, and animals that often appear, in fat, grey condition and look normal. And then you open them up and you're like, okay, that's horrific. What's going on in here and stuff. So if in doubt, throw it out. But obviously, normally I'd recommend taking the meat, take some photos or videos if something does look a bit sus, and just send them through to someone and be like, hey, have you seen this before? And someone might be like, yeah, that's just I can't tell you how many times I've just got a photo of a gallbladder, for example. And then obviously the green bile and stuff, and people are just like, what is that? So just, I wouldn't necessarily say throw the meat straight off the bat, but there's certainly been some times where people have found some fascinating things in there. And I'm like, yeah, I would definitely not eat that. And I'd say I'm probably a bit less cautious than most on what animals and wild game stuff I would eat. But yeah, if you're in doubt, throw it out and go and find a new one, because it's not worth your potential health or potential life, I guess, in some situations, and obviously that of your friends and family.
When butchering animals, there's obviously certain organs and things like that are going to contribute a lot more mess, and then associated with that is bacteria, and that's often where we get that contamination, which can introduce just meat spoilage and things like that, and unpleasant taste, which is probably on the more less serious end of things, whereas they can also associate with diseases, as we're going to talk about next week. But you just want to be super careful when messing even with blood. Blood is obviously a medium for bacteria. You also want to avoid things like the urinary tract, so reflecting the bladder when if you are gutting an animal, being really careful not to pierce the guts and things like that. So we'll talk about gutting deer in a second, or animals in general in a second, and the benefits to gutting an animal. But you just want to make sure that every little incision that you're doing, and then all the cuts and flows with your knife, is super controlled and handled. One, for safety, so you're not cutting yourself. But two, just because if you do contaminate and then that gets on the meat, it just makes the whole process so much more difficult, and the end result of your meat that you get back home, it really does, you can notice it, it makes a big difference just in the eating quality. Same, I guess, goes with females that are lactating. You want to just avoid things like the milk when processing these animals, as well as, when you're removing the rectum and the anus and things like that. You want to make sure that it's basically what I call the poo tube. If you've done it, you want to go in quite cleanly with your knife, go around the anus and be able to pull that back when you're gutting the animal and remove all those guts in one clean flow. Same goes for the esophagus and the trachea or the windpipe as well, because all of these sources are basically from the front to the back of the animal connected. And you've just got to think of that as like grass comes in the front, exits as feces at the back. But in that whole process, there's all this fermentation, bacteria, gut microbes, like all that type of stuff that are essentially not great for us or the meat. So you want to get that out as cleanly as possible.
Yeah, we always got described as essentially like we're large donuts, really. So there's a hole, like what Ayden was saying, in the mouth, there's a hole at our anus. And like our body spends a fair bit of time and energy establishing that gut barrier or gut to body barrier, essentially, trying to prevent, like there's obviously a lot of good bacteria that live in our guts and have in our intestines, everything like that, have really important functions. But these bacteria, given the right circumstances, and are quite opportunistic, and obviously can then colonize the meat and then also obviously spoil it, but also get you quite sick. So just being really, really careful, especially with that gut cavity, but also urine and milk, like what Ayden was saying, is really important for obviously meat quality, but just like overall human health. So make sure that whenever you're doing anything to do with the guts, you're really careful. And it's not to say that like if I do a quartering away shot, for example, or a quartering on shot, and I go through the guts, that the rib eyes are completely spoiled and everything like that. But I'll definitely be like washing them when I get back to camp and stuff like that, and making them as clean as possible, and then like cooking them really well, because like any like there's so many factors which we'll get to in next week's podcast, but around meat science and meat quality, but then also meat safety and stuff like that. So making sure that you're as clean as possible, and that includes like wearing gloves, obviously, to prevent you don't realize there's billions of bacteria on your skin, in your hands and stuff like that. So you touching the meat physically is actually introducing, because like if you think about a deer's thigh or a goat's thigh or whatever like that, like the muscle in there, there's actually at zero bacteria and stuff. So like often when people just like take a little bit of raw meat and eat it, and everyone's like, oh, that's savage and stuff, it's like you're probably less likely to get sick from that meat than you are like licking your hand at that point, because there's no, like in theory, if that animal's like perfectly healthy and stuff and there's no abscess there, then really there should be no bacteria in that meat other than what you're about to introduce. So, wearing gloves is obviously important for not introducing infections to the meat, but it's also really important for if you've got little cuts and stuff on your hand, or little like ulcers or whatever, burns, anything like that, you can actually get infections from, milk, urine, and especially blood, from certain types of bacteria in animals. So obviously with we talk about with wild pork, especially like brucellosis and stuff like that. Like we've had a couple of good friends that have actually contracted it, and it's it affects you a lot. Like it's really quite bad. But also things like lepto as well, which you mainly get through urine and stuff like that. There's a lot of other like salmonellas, E. coli and stuff that mainly are through like the GIT cavity and stuff, like if you're penetrating the guts and everything like that. But there's plenty of opportunistic infections too, that like if it's just like the wrong set of circumstances where you've got like a bit of gut cavity or whatever that gets into a cut, that can quite easily fester, especially like given the right environment. So just trying to be as clean as possible. And obviously like if you're not going to carry gloves, make sure like as soon as you finish, you go and wash your hands somewhere as thoroughly as you can. But like some of the people that I actually know that have got like brucellosis and stuff, it's actually been from them not washing their hands, and they didn't take any meat. They actually just cut out a set of jaws and stuff like that, and then ate a muesli bar afterwards, and they reckon that's how they got it. So just being super clean, super careful when you are doing this butchering stuff, and making sure that you're not going to essentially inoculate yourself with some sort of disease that's then going to cause you to get quite sick.
Now, I hear you guys asking, we've obviously mentioned it a couple of times on this podcast, we've referred to gutting versus the gutless method of butchering. And these are probably just the two simplest ways of sort of differing as to how to get your meat out of the bush. I'll be honest, we used to pretty much try and gut everything, especially with smaller animals. Like I remember if we'd shoot a chital deer, we'd try and gut, the hind and remove all the organs and basically carry out the rest of the animal whole. This is just how we were taught and how it was done going on, 20 years. We've been bow hunting for a long time now. We learned from our father, and I dare say he learnt from, whether it was his grandparents or things like this. Like it's almost people, I think, when they grew up on the farm, it was that whole aspect of, take everything, leave nothing, like waste nothing, leave nothing on the mountains. So I think as time has gone on, we've adapted and gone, why do we spend so much time gutting an animal, physically removing the gastrointestinal tract from like the abdomen, when we're not actually taking a lot of that in, like, you know, our Western society? We're a first world country here in Australia. We don't eat, most of us in general, I'm generalizing here, but most of us don't eat, you know, the stomach contents, for example. Like a few of us will selectively take, you know, the liver, if we want to do liver capsules and things like that, and obviously enjoy those metabolic like benefits. Some of us will take the heart, like it's probably my favorite cut. You know, I've heard of people taking the kidneys and other things like that. But again, these are probably the more extreme versions. Again, I think it's great that people want to utilize the animals, but for 99% of, you know, hunters out there, we're not eating the guts or the GIT tract. So I think there's been a shift, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, of people converting more to what we are calling the gutless method, which is essentially where, as the animal falls and lays on the ground, we get to work. Normally, like when we gut an animal, we'll turn it on its back. We'll, you know, try and lay it nice and flat. We'll go from the sternum down towards, you know, where its private parts are, and we'll make one long incision on the ventral, so the belly side of that animal, basically, through the skin, through the linear albar, into the like abdomen, and then we'll start, like, you know, trying to get our elbows in there, basically cut through the diaphragm. Like, it's a massive process, but in the meantime, it's actually super messy too. Like, I look back on all the gutting that I've done, and you come out of it, even when you're super efficient, and because you've got to go in there and almost like remove the pluck and you know, pull things and cut things as you're going, you basically are, as I said, elbow deep in this animal, trying to remove the offal and the organs and the gastrointestinal tract. So I think there's definitely been a shift to that gutless method, where you can just cut through the hair or the hide as cleanly as possible, reflect it, and then if you know what you're doing in very few cuts, you can really quickly remove the bulk of the meat without ever touching what we've talked about for the last half an hour as, you know, like the nasty stuff, the stuff where the bacteria is lurking, I guess.
So we won't write off the gutting method completely. It's just that, to be honest, mainly when I do it is like when I specifically am doing like essentially a meat hunt, really, where I'm like, I want to take as much meat from this as animal as possible. And especially when I'm taking like some like particular cuts, when I want some neck meat, when I want, you know, for doing like slow cooks and roasts, when I want the ribs and that type of thing, because like really with the gutless method, you're essentially taking the back legs, the front legs, and the back straps. You know, you can take the neck meat and stuff too. It does just get a little bit more finicky and stuff like that. But the pros of actually gutting means that you take like every scrap of meat like off the animal, really. And like what Ayden was saying, like if you want to take, like I used to eat a fair bit of liver, you know, I don't really like kidneys because they taste like piss personally. But yeah, like you have everything available to take, like whatever parts of the animal that you want. You can then carry like the whole animal out and just, utilize it. You can actually cool it down as a whole carcass. So you can chuck that in a cool room and, you know, hang it properly as they would sort of in an abattoir. And it's also really good for setting it up so that you can set it up as a flat rug, because obviously like your first cut is from that sort of, Ayden was saying, like sternum to where like an udder would be, or where, you know, the pizzle would be on an animal. And so like you can do that first initial cut and then follow that all the way around to skin the animal, like when it's hung up later on potentially, or you can even do it on the ground, or when you carry it out, for example, and then you can set it up so that you can actually take that skin as a flat rug, which then, you know, like you obviously tan and everything like that, and, you know, can make a really nice feature in your house and home.
I think it's worth saying here, like with the gutting pros as well, like if you are going out for a meat mission and you're trying to be really super strategic and potentially even like spotlighting if you've got access on a property, or you're able to shoot an animal that you know comes onto a paddock that you can get, you know, say fringe country for fallow or sambar or something like that, and you can get your car to a very close distance and then carry it out, or simply even lift it up into the car. One of the best ways for gutting, or the pros for gutting, is that you can essentially shoot something, have it drop there, go over and remove the guts, or exactly what you don't want from the animal. And then, as James was saying with that skin, keep the skin on intact. So you can chuck it in the back of your ute or the back of your buggy. It's got very little blood and guts in there because you've done all that, removed all that. So the rest, in theory, is meat. And you quickly drive that back up to your camp or the homestead or wherever you're staying. And as soon as you get that deer back and hanging, you can then go and remove the hair. And the hair is basically, we want to, in general, remove the hair as quick as possible. But in that instance, it's actually acted as a bit of a safety covering for all of your meat so that there's nothing touching, as James said earlier. Like if you think of that meat under the thigh there as pristine, there's nothing that, has contaminated it. So this can be really good as well for smaller animals, obviously, such as, feral pigs, chiddle deer, goats, fallow deer, rabbits, like animals that if you gut them and you don't have too far to walk back to camp or to the car or whatever, and you can carry that animal out whole, it really does have benefits because you can get the animal out quickly and then spend a little bit more time removing the skin, as James was saying, and then selectively breaking down that whole animal into every single cut that you can imagine.
Whether you're making your way up a scree cliff or hiking a distant trail, you want to be confident in the boots that you wear, and for Ayden and I, that means lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX 3s for over 5 years now, and we've never even had a blister. We've teamed up with the Lower team to extend their generosity to you to get you a unique 10% off code by using the code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. We know you're going to love them. Some of the cons of actually gutting the animal. So obviously, like what Ayden was saying, it's quite time consuming. Like in a lot of ways, I think in the same amount of time that I can gut an animal properly, remove sort of the rectum area, go all the way up, to where the esophagus and the trachea start at the base of the throat, and like remove all that. I can probably have all the quarters, like the 4 quarters off and the back straps removed. And in that, you're probably getting 75% of the meat. So really like the main meat that you're missing out on is probably the neck meat and the ribs. Obviously the flaps and stuff like that, like the belly flaps and stuff where you're just probably going to mince them anyway. So yeah, it is quite time consuming for what sort of the little extra benefits that you do get. And the other thing is it's quite messy. Like obviously like there is a higher risk that you're going to pop the guts and stuff like that, which can then impact your meat quality and eating experience. But it's also messy in the sense that like often you've got to sort of reach up into the sternum area, up into the front of the chest cavity, and pull out all the often there's like a lot of congealed blood and everything like that in there because you've done like a really good shot, and the critters only run 20 meters or whatever. But yeah, there could be liters of blood in that chest cavity. So then you're almost having to like scoop it and pull all that out with the heart and lungs when you're getting it out there. And it's just a lot messier, like then having to do the gutless method when really you're just taking sort of almost the choice or more select cuts, I guess, and not really having to risk getting the GIT.
So as you can probably imagine just on what we're discussing here and I guess the shorter list of pros and a little list of cons there for gutting, it definitely has its place, but we, as in James and I, have pretty much moved to the gutless method, which, as James said, I think the benefit is that it's so much faster. It removes roughly 75% of the meat in 3 cuts pretty much per side in terms of the front leg, and back straps. If you want to add to that and simply take the neck, then it's, again, you just continue your incision from the back strap up to the top of the back of the head, and then I won't even remove the whole neck as in go through the vertebrae. I'll just slice the sides of the meat and you can get, again, it's like a 90% yield without any bone, again, because when I consider the gutless method, and one of the biggest pros is that it's so easy to do on large animals. So, for example, I started doing this a lot more when I was hunting sambar deer, buffalo, larger animals where there's no way you're going to gut a buffalo and be able to carry it. it out of the bush. So you've selectively got to go and remove a back leg, hang it in a tree, know that you're still going to be butchering for potentially an hour on all these other cuts as you go along. And every time you basically think of, location A is where your animal is, in location B, you're walking 5 meters to the shade, hanging a leg. Because if a buffalo dies in the sun, you're not moving it, unfortunately, unless you can get a car to it and drag it or something like that. Even with 2 or 3 or 4 people, it's so hard to roll a buffalo, let alone drag it or move it to a shady spot. So as quickly as possible, you're just going to start, removing, in my mind, the biggest cuts of meat. Or what cut do I want first? It's often the back straps and back legs, because in those 4 cuts, I guess, 2 cuts times 2, you're getting majority of the meat, and you don't have to touch the guts. You stay pretty clean. So I guess when you start the gutless method as well, it's pretty much however the animal falls. Like if a bull elk falls on the side of a hill and its right hand shoulder is on up high and it's caught by its antler on a tree or something like that, you can literally leave it in place, tie it there in place if you need, and just start removing the front leg on that exposed left hand side, the neck on that left hand side, the back strap on the left and right, probably, I'd imagine. And then the other thing, as you're going and removing meat, you're making that larger animal, say a buffalo, a lot more movable. So as you go and remove the front shoulder, the back strap, the neck, the back leg on that side, suddenly from, a 300-400 kilo animal, you can now actually roll it because it's lost a bit of meat, and those legs aren't going to stick out and fight you and combat you when you try and roll it. So then you roll it, and because you haven't exposed any guts or anything like that, you haven't done any gutting, everything stays nice within the abdominal cavity, and there's very little contamination. There might be a bit of blood lying around or a little bit of loose skin and things that are flapping, but most of your meat on that offside or that underside has been preserved by the hide. And then you just go again and reflect that, and then you go and take those choice cuts of meat. So it really is an amazing method, and again, why we've converted, because it just is super effective.
Just a couple of little tips, I guess, with the gutless method. So there is still a risk that you're actually going to hit the guts, and that's something that probably more for the newbies or people that haven't sort of butchered a lot of animals, and it can surprise, I'd say I've butchered probably hundreds of animals with how much we've eaten wild game and guiding and that type of thing over the years. And even me, we were actually butchering a feral goat this morning, and it happened to me this morning where along the pelvis there's a little, it's called the obturator foramen, but it's essentially a little opening in the pelvis, which when you're removing the back legs, sometimes if you're not cutting in the right spot, you can do a little bit of a nick. And especially if an animal's been sitting, just say you don't do the best shot, or it takes you a bit longer because it's in really thick bush or blackberries, whatever, to find the animal, and the guts have sort of had time to sort of blow up a little bit, and there's a bit more pressure in that abdominal cavity. When you actually sometimes the intestines especially can pop through this little hole. So it's really important to sort of know your anatomy and know where your knife is sort of pointed and directed. Because obviously if you hit that, you're still hitting gut and you're going to be contaminating your meat. So it's important to still be aware, even when you are doing the gutless method, that you can actually hit guts. So just keep that in mind, especially when you're removing those back legs. And another thing, when you're removing the back straps, just for cleanliness, I'm a bit of a hair Nazi in the sense that I hate any dirt, debris, branches, grass. I try and keep, because it's all contamination, right? So like I said, that meat is sterile. Whatever we're introducing, whether it be from our hands or the environment, is going to make that meat sour potentially. So when I'm actually removing the back straps and stuff like that, so I generally speaking remove a back leg first, and then what I'll actually do is I'll continue that cut up whatever back leg it is, either the left or the right, and I'll continue that cut off the side of the back strap all the way up to the back of the scapula, and then I'll actually do a big flap and remove that section of skin in one go. Because what I see people do often is they actually cut up along the spine, and obviously even if you have the best knife handling skills and everything like that, and you do it in one big cut and you cut from the skin out through the hair, so you're not cutting a lot of hair follicles, inevitably you do cut some hair follicles. even if you're the best person in the world. So what I try and do is, especially if I'm not going to be taking the ribs and stuff like that, I actually do my cut like along the side of the ribs. Like if you imagine like the animal's on the side, almost like just say an inch off the edge of the outer edge of the back strap, and then I'll do the same cut like along the top of the pins, and then along the top of the back edge of the scapula and stuff. But then I'll reflect the big skin flap over completely so as to not essentially inoculate my back straps with hair. And I mean, like, you are going to be removing the silver skin, so you do have a little bit of grace here, I guess, and a little bit of movement in the sense of like not getting sort of hair on your back straps and stuff. But I just, like, for me personally, like I said, I'm a hair Nazi. I hate debris on any of my meat. Like I just hate it. And so I've sort of developed or learnt this method, I guess, because I kept getting pissed off when I was coming home, and you dive into your meat bag and you pull out the back straps and had like little bits of hair on them and stuff like that. And it's like, how could I do this better? So, and it just made sense. Like, you're still gonna have to do the same amount of cuts. Like, why not just do it so that it prevents actually getting hair on your back straps rather than just like sort of, doing it the traditional way, I guess.
So you've heard us talk there about plenty of benefits of the gutless method. It is worth mentioning, that there are a few, not necessarily negatives, but there are considerations to the gutless method. As you've probably imagined here, as you're cutting not random bits of skin and reflecting it and then removing a section, but say you remove that forelimb and then you remove that back strap on that same side, you're effectively exposing the rib cage. So you've got to make a conscious decision there and then. Do I want this section of meat before I roll it or before I go to the next area? Because as soon as the difference, I guess, there in the gutless method compared to the gutting method is that with the gutted animal, as soon as you remove those guts and things, you've got a slit on the belly and that's about it. The rest of the animal is still covered in hide. It's not going to get as dirty as such from the outside, whereas your concern with gutting is the dirt on the inside. So you've got to think with gutless, dirt, hair, as James has said, grass matter, or leaves. I can't tell you how much, like leaves and anything dry around the animal just love to cling to any exposed meat. So you're using, as James said perfectly before, you've got this amazing clean product under the hair. And then as soon as you start removing that hair to remove the meats and the cuts and then hang it, you essentially want to be chucking that straight into a game bag. So I would say it does require a lot of, prior organization, making sure that, again, you've got a tarp that you can lay all your meat down on, that you've got a clean area that you can put game bags down. And then, as you're cutting stuff, if you've got a mate there, they can be putting things in dry bags and hanging them. If you've got big animals that you're going to be sitting there for the next half an hour butchering. So I think when it comes to the main cons of the gutless method, it's that it can add debris, dirt, and hair and all that type of stuff if your butchering process isn't efficient and it's a bit unorganized. So you do definitely develop like, if I hold the leg here, or if I remove the back leg first and then go up to the back strap and then the forelimb, it's better than if I go the other way around, or if I do one back leg and then flip it and go to the other back leg. You'll find your own sort of formula, I guess.
And the last negative, I guess, for the gutless method is that you don't actually get the tenderloin. So for me, that's not like a huge, like often the animals that I'm shooting are pretty small. Like in something like a red stag, I'll, because it's so large and stuff like that, or a buffalo or something like that, like I'll generally actually open it up. I won't gut the animal per se. I'll sort of more pull them to the side and actually get the tenderloins out. But if I'm shooting like a little nanny goat or a fallow doe or like a small boar or something like that, when it's going to be, like only maybe an inch across and like 5 or 6 inches long, for me, it's just not even worth like the effort to go in there and actually get it personally. Like, so that is one negative, that you don't just have that easily accessible. But I just think it's one of these effort for reward things. So I don't typically go in there. I know a lot of friends that do, like every time. I'm just not that much of a steak guy. So I guess for me, it's not a huge loss if I'm not going in there and getting like a tiny little scrap of meat, even if it is the most tender on the animal.
Embark on an unforgettable journey with our fully guided Chiddle Deer hunts, catering to both rifle and bow hunters. Spotted Safaris is conducted in the heart of the Basalt Wall region, North Queensland, Australia. We specialise in catering to all experience and fitness levels of our clients, providing trophy stag chiddle hunts as well as beginner focus adventures and meat hunts. With over 15 years bow hunting chiddle deer Our guides know these animals and the grounds they hunt like the back of their hands. With chances at a mature basalt boar as a bycatch and some spectacular wildlife viewing, there really is something for everyone at Spotted Safaris. Inquire today by emailing spottedsafaris@hotmail.com or simply send them a DM on their socials.
Now we're going to jump into the processing and refrigeration and then long-term storage of your meat. So this obviously has huge impacts again on the eating quality, but also the risks of contamination and bacterial replication. So it's important not to, obviously, like the biggest no-no, I guess, is like leaving your meat in your backpack and going and celebrating. So, like we understand that you've obviously potentially got like a trophy of a lifetime, but also like you owe it to the meat, I guess, and the animal that you've just carried off the mountain to sort of prepare it in the best way possible. And that means like getting it out of your backpack, especially if it's in like plastic bags or something like that, or garbage bags, because that meat's really going to sweat. And what you want to do is enable that meat to go into rigor mortis. So this is really important because even in abattoir situations and stuff like that with beef and sheep, we've realized that cooling things down too rapidly can actually have negative effects on the eating quality. So even in those type of scenarios where they're obviously huge and have massive sort of human health concerns and risks around it, they even know that cooling down the meat too quickly can then have huge negative eating quality benefits or effects, I guess. So what you want to do is, like, we generally just hang our meat for a little bit. We want to get a crust on it, which is actually going to prevent contamination, because moisture is really, really bad at enabling bacterial replication. So even in the scenario where I was saying before, if I shot something quartering away and pierced the gut cavity and stuff like that, and wanted to remove the tenderloins, and then I wash the tenderloins, I'll always like really, really dry them and make sure that they're completely 100% dry, because any moisture is going to be really bad and increase the risk of bacterial replication. Another thing also can be negative is chucking it into like a really like ice slushy or something like that. Like, it's great for obviously cooling down the animal, but any moisture and stuff like that. So making sure that you're just removing all the water from that ice as well is going to be really important, once again, for just preventing that bacterial contamination.
Yeah, I think we've all been guilty of it, certainly in the past, where, you shoot a stag or something like that, you get back to camp, and even if you take the meat out of your bag and chuck it in, like an iced esky or something like that, ice won't last too long when you've got, a massive amount of warm, hot meat that's just come off an animal, been radiating heat in your backpack as you walk a couple of Ks back to camp. So quickly it'll start to melt. And then, as James said, it forms this, you might have ice in there and the meat will definitely be cooling, but the meat at the bottom of the esky or the yeti or whatever will be sitting there in, say, like an inch or a couple of mils or whatever centimeters of blood and oozing liquid and all that type of stuff. So it's great to, whilst you maybe quickly drink something and replenish, organize. Hey, you might call someone and say, hey, I've just shot something, I'm going to hang it tonight and bring it back tomorrow. Like, you might do certain things, but the plan is to get straight into that meat care and make sure that the meat is, one, cooling down. And I would rather, as James was saying, I would rather take meat out of an ice cool esky and hang it just in a nice cool dry spot, because you've got to think, when you shoot a buffalo and its body temperature is, say, 37 degrees or whatever, the second you remove it from the animal and there's no longer blood pumping through it, and you can hang it without the hair on it in a game bag under the shade in a nice, like, say that it's not even that windy, but there's, a 5 to 10 knot breeze, that's going to cool down so quickly into that 20s, 15s, etc., until you can get it out of the bush and back to camp. And then if by the time you do that, it's nightfall, and you can hang it again under a shaded area or an area where it's not going to get wet from rain and the elements, and it can just dry in like a nice temperate sort of crisp environment, that's going to be a lot better than just sitting it in a slurry of ice. So again, if it's stinking hot and it's taken you longer to get that meat off the mountain, I might chuck it straight in an ice bath just to cool the meat a little bit like quicker. But then as soon as like I've gone, okay, cool, I've cooled it down, I've had a drink because I'm probably exhausted and have a bit of heat stress. Now I'm going to start grabbing each individual cut and hanging it properly or trimming it properly and cleaning it properly. The last thing you want to do when you're hanging meat is have it touching one another, especially when you've got like big bloody sections of meat, for example, and you're hanging that near pristine sections such as the backstrap, because all you're going to do is transfer bacteria from one surface to another. So you've got to try and let air, and you've got to think surface area. You want the wind touching all four corners of that drumstick, basically. You don't want, it sitting on other bits and basically getting hot and humid and preventing airflow.
The next thing you need to think about is what your long-term plan is for these animals, and all these cuts. So, I mean, just say we've gone and removed the whole animal. If you've got the whole animal there and you're going to hang it in a cool room for a week, or, like what Ayden was saying before, you can buy some of these like big double freeze, like Coke sort of like drinks fridges and stuff like that, which make for really good for hanging. Like you can hang a whole red stag in one of those things, or like a couple of sheep or a couple of fallow does or a couple of fallow bucks. Like they're really, really handy. Or if you've got access to a cool room, once again. But thinking about like the long-term plan, so and how you're going to actually process that. Like you've obviously got the meat home, you've done the right thing, you're hanging it up in a tree, or you've chucked it in the fridge and you've cooled it down. I like to process the meat fully before I actually then chuck it in the freezer. So for me, that includes the mincing process. So we eat a lot of mince in our family, like tons of mince in our family when I think about it. Like we've always got mince wraps on the go because they're super easy, super delicious. And so generally for me, like I'll keep a select few cuts for steaks and stuff like that, and maybe some like venison shindies or something like that out of the back legs, or maybe some slow cooking stuff. But a lot of the time I'm just going to mince like a lot of the animal. So obviously in that case then, like I don't really need to worry too much about hanging it for like a huge amount of time if it's just going to end up in mince. So I like to mince it before I actually chuck it in the freezer, and have that fully labeled and everything like that. We like to cryovac all our stuff because it just puts it in like the nicest way possible. It also prevents freezer burn, and it's just so much easier than like we used to use like freezer bags or garbage bags and all that type of stuff. I mean, cryovac bags are so much easier to identify. You can pretty much see what like the chunk of meat is too. And just from a point of view that we like, Ayden and I are obviously quite successful hunters, I guess, and get a lot of sort of wild game meat and stuff, which obviously then means we share it with a lot of people. And some of these people aren't, I guess, like full on hunters and stuff, and they're just maybe getting into it, or they want to try venison, or they really like venison, and they just haven't been able to get it from somewhere else. And so I feel like giving someone like a cryovac backstrap is just a lot better presentation wise, I guess. And obviously it's not going to, preventing freezer burn is one thing that's going to affect eating quality, but just the mental sort of image and thought behind that meat before you even put it in your mouth, I think is really big, especially for these people, like I said, that may be non-hunters or just getting into it. And so yeah, like giving someone a cryovac chunk of even just mince is so much better than giving them like something that's just like in a freezer bag, I guess. And like cryovacing, like it's so easy, and it doesn't really cost that much. It's not that much more time, and just for I think the benefit in eating quality, but also just every part of sort of the chain, I guess, going through, I think it's definitely worth cryovacing your meat. But that's just our personal take on it, I guess. When it comes to cryovacing, there are a few considerations that I will definitely encourage people to go ahead and try and implement as well. You can definitely cryovac things, chuck it in a 500 gram portion and throw it in the freezer, or you can spend an extra 30 seconds and make sure that you've done really good labeling. Things that I'll include are like Chiddle deer stag, the date, what cut of meat it is. So it might say sirloin or backstrap or blah, 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 things like this. What I have shifted away from is using Sharpies and permanent markers and actually using color-coded stickers. So I've just gone to, like at a crafts place, and I've bought like a little red dot, and the red dot means backstraps, and I'll stick that either on the outside, or you can even print laminated paper, like have laminated paper, have it all cut to certain sizes that has the word backstrap on it, for example. And you can just put that in the cryovac bag, and because it's laminated, it's not going to contaminate your meat. It's not going to get wet from the meat. You've done everything properly. And that way it's so easy. Say you say to your wife or your partner or whatever back at home who isn't a hunter, and you say, hey love, I'm coming home tonight. I really want to cook some backstrap, and this is in the morning. Can you please defrost it? Oh, which one's the backstrap? Rather than going in there and pulling out a bit of neck meat, and then you come home trying to cook a steak and they've taken out neck meat because it looks the exact same to them as, every other
poorly labeled bag of meat in the freezer, at least with good labeling, anyone can see it. You know exactly what it is. You know when it was shot. You try and eat your older stuff before your newer stuff. It's just really essential. And that goes the same as like storing things, making sure that they're preserved in the correct portion sizes. So if you're someone that has, you're looking after yourself and your partner, there's no point putting a Red Stag backstrap in one Cryovac bag. Like, great if you want to be doing backstrap for the whole family or 10 people, just say, and having a few steaks and a bit of veggies and a salad and things. But if it's just, 2 of you and you want one meal, it's like have a, 6-inch portion of the backstrap and remove the silver side so that as soon as you defrost it, it's ready to go that evening. The same goes for mince. Like, I actually store my mince in like 500 gram batches, 1 kilo and 2 kilo batches. Like 2 kilos if I'm doing a massive taco thing, as James was saying earlier, and I'm cooking, savory mince for the week of meal prepping. 500 grams if I'm making burgers for that night. All these type of variations. And when it comes to cryovacking mince, especially those bigger cuts, if you're doing like a whole leg muscle for like a schnitzel, or a whole leg muscle that you're later on going to go and cube or cut up or something like that, I'll still try and cube things, as James was saying, the first time round, so that I know when I go and defrost it, it's cubed, it's ready to go, it's clean. I just have to cook it, because there's always things going on later. I try and be as best prepared earlier. And if I'm giving it to someone, I'd rather them have, inch by inch cubed meat rather than a whole cut that they're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. But what I was going to say is I like to cryovac my mince bags, not in circles, not in round, bags and chuck them in a freezer bag so that it's a big round ball of mince. When I cryovac things, I try and make it as flat packed as possible, just because the more surface area you have when you're trying to defrost things later on, the quicker it's going to actually thaw evenly. So you're not going to be cooking things and it's going to be all watery because you've got ice in the middle of this big ball of mince. All these sorts of things really are essential, and I think just comes back to that really good preparation. Once you do the hard yards of getting things out of the field and back home, you want to make it as ready to go as possible so that you can enjoy it with your family and friends.
Yeah, I definitely think, like what Ayden was saying, like we always have our meat essentially prepared to go and clean, whether it be removing the silver skin, like all the hair and debris that you might have missed the first time round, that you should be kicking yourself for in the kitchen, or, like your mince or whatever, like having everything essentially, like even cubing your steaking, stuff like that. If you're keeping like front shoulders on the bone or neck meat on the bone for like slow cooking, and yeah, obviously like keep that in there. But like if you've just got like a heap of random chunks of meat that you've like decided to keep, for dice sort of slow cooking and stuff, then yeah, like we dice it before, because then it's one less thing you got to do. Like you've got like a full dirty kitchen at this point, so you may as well just like have everything prepped and ready to go, because then really at that point all you're doing is like, if you're doing a slow cook, you're pulling that diced meat out, you might be rolling it in some corn flour or something like that before you brown it off to chuck it in the slow cook or whatever, but everything's ready to go. And I think it's also important, like the next thing is like if you are giving this meat away, like obviously a lot of us just consume it, but hopefully a lot of us are sharing it too with family and friends, but also potentially non-hunters and stuff like that, trying to make the meat look as good as possible, and hence like not giving someone, I've had people like tell me like, oh, we had some backstrap and stuff, and then they were saying that like the person had given it to them with the silver skin on, and so they obviously didn't know they needed to remove it, and they've like eaten that, and they're like, oh, it was like the worst thing I've ever eaten. Like, you know what I mean? So it's little things like that that just like really go a long way. And I think another thing to be a consideration, like if you are giving someone that's maybe not like a full-time hunter and stuff like that, and it's the first time they're trying wild game, maybe just give them like a bit of a recipe too. Like I can't think of how many times like people have cooked sort of venison backstrap. Like it's probably the thing that I share the most with people, because they like it's pretty easy to do, but it's also like extremely easy to stuff up, and even like goat and that type of thing, like like just saying to people like, okay, look, this is what I'm giving you, this is goat, sort of not offcuts but diced up bits of goat and stuff like that. This is going to be really good as a slow cook or a curry, and this is like the recipe. You like send them a recipe. And same with like venison backstrap, for example. It's like, okay, venison is super lean. You can see that there is not a single drop of fat on this thing, right? So if you overcook it, it is going to be tough like a leather boot. So it's like you need to have it medium rare. And it's like, if you don't like medium rare steak, then this is probably not like, you need to almost like do your, like, it's hard because you're giving someone meat, but you almost need to do like a full on like search and investigation into like how they're anticipating that they're going to cook it, because the last thing you want to do is like set yourself up to look like a jerk, because you've actually given them like the best cut of meat, being the backstrap or the tenderloin or whatever. They've scorched the absolute shit out of it, and then which then obviously results in them having a terrible eating experience, and they're going to think that you've like given them some crap bit of meat or something like that, or that the animal was, like it wasn't like a good one to take or whatever. Like they're going to come up with some excuse in their brain being like, oh, Trevor bloody set me up here to fail. But the real thing is like they just cooked it poorly. You know what I mean? And they're not going to obviously blame the animal, like, they're not going to blame themselves for not realizing they cooked it poorly. They're going to blame you and say, oh, you gave me a crap cut of meat. And so just making sure that you've actually like shared with some recipes and stuff and actually almost told them how to cook it. Because I can't think of how many times, hunters have sort of or even so-called friends or family have done someone the dirty, given them the best cut of meat, and then haven't told them how to cook it, and it's just obviously fallen apart and been super tough or not cooked the right way. Same with like people cooking diced meats like not long enough, and then like almost like trying to stir fry it or something like that, and then obviously it's like super tough. So just, if you are going to be giving someone some meat, make sure that you actually sort of half tell them how to cook it, or at least know that they've got like some indication of like the way that they're going to cook it in mind before you just like hand over your best cuts of meat.
Without flogging a dead horse here as well, like something that James just said there really struck with me, and I think it comes back to that labeling side of things. I can't tell you how many times with, like, for example, Chiddle Deer, I do a lot of guiding up in North Queensland. So we might shoot 10 to 15 stags a year, and the clients that I have can't always take the meat. So I'll enjoy hundreds of kilograms of venison that I give out a lot to my friends. Like I can't tell you, one of my ex-housemates from Townsville, I dropped off like 40 kilos of venison to him in one batch, and he goes, shit, I can't store this. So he went and bought a chest freezer, and then like a week or two later when I had another hunt, came back with like 80 kilos, and he literally lived off venison for a year. But one thing that's super important, I try to always, as I said, and this just comes back to that good labeling, I'll often color code things, but I'll date things and write, Chiddle Stag and the date, so that I know if I eat Chiddle Stag from, the 1st of April, for example, 2025, and I go and try that backstrap and I cook it perfectly, it's been prepared the exact same as I do all my other deer, everything's the same, but it's super tough and chewy, and I go, it should not be like this. I'm not going to go and give that to a mate. So what I'll do is I'll go in the freezer and find all of the Chiddle Stag, from the 1st of April, 2025, and I'll go and mince all of those cuts that I thought I was going to steak, for example. So there might be another 5 slabs of backstrap. I might give it one more shot of cooking it and seeing how it goes. But if it comes back tough, you've got to think that wild game, whilst we're saying there's so many benefits to, butchering and eating your own wild game, these are individual animals, and it's not a production system like the beef industry and all that type of stuff. So they can be different. A stag might have run 20 Ks the day before and been chased by someone on the neighbouring property, and then you've shot it and done all the best things you can with it, but it was stressed out. It might have been bashed a month ago. And hopefully by doing all these pre-checks and making everything as, safe and efficient and consistent, I guess, as possible, and having, your method of butchering, knowing that you've done all the things beforehand, you've got everything ready at home to make sure that it's like ready to go when you hang it, refrigerate it, chill it in the cool room, freeze it eventually, package it, all these things. You've done your due diligence and made sure that the finished product is going to be as good as possible. But I'll let you know now, it's just sometimes things are tougher. And that's why, again, I've never had really tough mince. I'll just say that now. And that's why, whether it's venison, goat, wild boar, I love mince. I love slow cooking. I do a lot of curries. I do a lot of stir fries, all these sorts of things. But there is nothing better than a nice, clean little cut of backstrap to share with people, but it may be tough. So if you've labeled it really well, it just makes it easier to go and retract that from your freezer, go and mince it, add it to the mince pile. You'll still love it, but it just saves you that disappointment and heartache later on.
We'll just finish this section of the podcast by saying that your mother-in-law is already looking for an excuse not to like you. So giving her a tough bit of backstrap is going to be that excuse. So don't be that guy. Make sure you label your meat. Make sure you've given them the best cut possible and you've told them how to cook it. And hopefully they're not going to add that to the list of why you don't get a Christmas present for that year. If you've ever thought of overseas travel and hunting in the United States, then listen up. Whether it be an annual trip or a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, Hunting Full and the consultancy team will cater for your needs. I've been utilising their service for a couple of years now and could not be happier with it. The whole team, from the admin staff to their hunt advisors, has been a pleasure to work with. Hunting Full not only helped me draw one of the best tags in Montana, but we sat down and had multiple meetings to construct a hunt strategy to ensure I had the best hunt possible. If you're interested in using Hunting Full's license application services to draw more tags across the Western United States, email applications@huntingfull.com. That is APPLICATION @HUNTINFOOL.com and mention Twin Elements to get 25% off your first year of service. The Hunting Full team will take care of the rest. We're now going to jump into some FAQs. So if you have a question that you'd like us to answer on the podcast, or a question that you'd just like Ayden or I to answer, personally, it doesn't have to necessarily feature if you let us know, please email that through to info@twinelements.com.au, or you can send us a message on Instagram at Twin Elements account, or Ayden Doumtsis or James Doumtsis Outdoors account, and we will answer those questions and also feature them on the podcast if you'd like us to. So this week's question, one of them was sent in by Luke Sandry. So I've had a lot of chats with Luke. He sent in a lot of questions personally in the past, but this one was, what month is it appropriate to shoot a doe if she has a fawn with her? When are they finished weaning and self-sufficient?
Yeah, so this question I'll answer in two sort of sections. There's, I guess, the time that the later time in terms of the longer interval where does will really truly get sick of their fawns and naturally wean them at the latest, and that's coinciding with when they've got to sort of kick them off to really they're pregnant by this stage with a new fawn, going into potentially spring and summer where things are going to get a bit trying, maybe even winter, for example, and there might be diminished resources around. They're trying to wean that fawn so that they're no longer in a poor body condition, because lactating and just having the stress of a fawn around is obviously going to impact them. So I would say naturally in nature at around 7 months of age. That's probably that June, July period, knowing that most of our does, if they're bred in April, when we assume that they're going to have the peak rut coinciding with that shortened day length, they have a gestation of 7 months, and then those fawns will stick around with the does for around 7 months in nature. But also understanding that many, deer farmers and producers want to shorten this cycle, and fawns in reality can actually be weaned at 3 to 4 months. I'm sure many of us have seen it when hunting the rut. So, say our fawn's born on December 1st, you've got, by the time it's January 1st, Feb, March, April, it's about 4 months old. I've seen plenty of fawns that by this stage are eating grass. They're not even with the doe. The doe's getting chased around by the buck. They're part of the mob, but they're not necessarily dependent on that doe anymore. So I would be super comfortable shooting a doe in April during the rut. If I'm out there trying to, I've only got a certain limited amount of days to hunt for the year, and I can't get it done on a buck, or I'm really targeting a mature buck and I'm letting all those younger bucks walk through because I want to improve my buck to doe ratio, I've got no concerns with shooting a doe. Obviously, you want to still be doing head checks. And if you walk down a game trail and a doe and a fawn walk up over the ridge over towards you, and you go, oh, this fawn is obviously smaller than everything else I've seen for the rut, I'm not going to shoot that doe. If I need meat, then I definitely will try and shoot both, or I'll shoot the fawn first and then try and shoot the doe or something like that. There are definitely different considerations for different circumstances. But if I notice that a fawn is obviously smaller than what I think it needs to be weaned, then I'll leave it. But hopefully that answers your question a little bit there, Luke. I'm not sure if James wants to touch on it here. It's definitely a very variable sort of, it depends on everyone's ethics and all these type of things.
Yeah, I'd just add, I think, so with that fawn, it's the same with all ruminants and stuff like that. So that fawn from, a week old would actually be eating, at that point, its diet is obviously predominantly mother's milk. So it's going to be it's going to be drinking a lot of milk from a week old. But it is also important to note that from even that super young age, it will actually be eating grass. So essentially the thing is, it then obviously comes down to the ethics. It's like, you could probably shoot a fawn's mother, that was 2 months old, right? And that animal will be able to transition and survive, but will it be able to thrive? Well, probably not. And will it be able to like become a big, mature doe? Yes, it will, but it will take time, and it'll probably become like a late doe and stuff like that. We've talked about these things on previous podcasts. So it's like, there's so many important factors, and that's why it's not really a black and white answer in terms of like, from this age onwards. But it's like, if you're shooting does during the rut and those fawns are, 3 to 4 months old, well, at that stage, it's going to be drinking milk, but it's going to be like a very small proportion of its actual like intake and stuff like that. And so like it would easily, like, yes, it's going to have like more of a rush transition, I guess, from having like a little bit of milk and mainly green pasture and stuff to full only just pasture and sort of fibrous feed, more than it would naturally. Like obviously if it was still drinking off mum and then, mainly getting fiber and stuff like that. But it's like that animal will be fine. So like I wouldn't, during the rut at the moment like that, I wouldn't definitely be passing up does, especially like obviously like what Ayden was saying, like if she's a doe that maybe had a fawn later, for example, like if she got bred just say in June the year before and she ended up dropping a fawn, in sort of like that Jan-Feb period or whatever, like, it wasn't only the other day that I saw a fawn that had like I saw a doe with a fawn that was like smaller than a Labrador, for example, in which case she was super late. And for like managing my herd and stuff, like, yeah, I did want to shoot her and stuff, but then obviously you got the ethics of like that fawn at that stage is very much dependent on her mum. And so like if you shoot the doe, you're essentially setting that fawn up where it's like, yes, it may be able to wean, but it may also just predominantly starve and die. So like I obviously opted not to shoot her. But, if I saw her in a couple of months with that fawn and you could still identify it was small, then yeah, you'd probably try and target both of them, to be honest. Obviously, like what we've discussed about in previous podcasts. But like I said, Luke, it's obviously a great question, and it's one that you probably wanted a more hard and fast answer on. So I guess to give that to you, like after the rut or during the rut for most cases, would definitely feel comfortable shooting a doe, and that fawn's going to be fine in most cases, unless she's a late fawn being born, or it being born. So that's probably going to be the best answer we're going to be able to give you here, mate.
I think, yeah, just to summarize that, because we did touch on a fair few factors there, but if you were to shoot does between June, July, and then even if you limited it at October, November, understanding that you're shooting most likely, like it's very rare for deer to not be pregnant, like they just breed and reproduce. That's pretty much why they're there. They eat, sleep, repeat, and reproduce. So as long as you're comfortable shooting does that have weaned fawns and then pregnant, like it's this age-old debate of when do you shoot things, and that's why a lot of people just shoot stags and males, because, they're out there looking after themselves and there's one deer and that's, you've got no repercussions. Whereas, again, at the end of the day, as long as you're doing things as best as possible, I don't think you're going to have any, argument from any of us. The next question comes in from Grant Stepien, and Grant writes to us, "We have been chasing a nice fallow buck since early Feb, getting ready for the rut. We have him patterned pretty well on trail cams. My question is it too late to get the chainsaw out and cut a couple of shooting lanes? Will this cause him to leave completely, in your opinion? I'm hoping to get this one with my son, so a stalk will be quite hard with two of us moving, noting that he is 9 years of age." I will just add to this that this question came in probably a month ago when we actually initially answered it, but just due to the sheer amount of questions that we got. So this was sort of probably closer to back in mid-March, just for consideration.
I guess for me, I'm going to answer this question as if, so we're actually recording this podcast in the 1st of April. So I'm going to answer it, Grant, if that's all right, as if you've patterned a buck essentially for the last month, just say, and he's been going to a scrape, because I think that's going to be probably the most likely scenario. But I mean, you could also put this scenario into like you've patterned him and he's going to a dam, or you pattern this scenario and he's walking through a particular game trail at a particular time of day. And so for me, I would say what I would do in this scenario, whether you patterned him, like assuming, I'm going to say it's going to be on a scrape. So he's going to this scrape, he's going there every day and stuff like that, just say in the mornings. I would definitely go in there in the middle of the day firstly, just because that's going to be like the lowest impact. Even if you like, that's when they sort of, I guess, like in my mind, that's when they almost like they see farmers and that type of thing, like they expect to see people. Like they don't, if you're going to say, oh, when are they going to have the most interactions with people, it's probably more the farmers and people fencing or, mustering and stuff like that, which is normally going to be in the middle of the day and not at like the crack of dawn when you're actually going to be out there hunting them and stuff. So, I would be going in there in the middle of the day when most things are going to be bedded. Even if you're pushing him off his scrape accidentally, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. And for me, like, yeah, you could use a handsaw if you were like super sensitive and stuff like that about noise and you didn't, like it was a small block or something like that and you didn't want to like if you were super, super risk adverse. But if this was me, I would be getting in there in the middle of the day with a chainsaw and I'd be cutting whatever lanes you wanted. And this, like, I'm a bow hunter, so I'm going to say, I don't know if you're bow or rifle, but I'm going to say that even if you were cutting up a tree like 25 to 30 meters off his scrape, if it's his main scrape that you've patterned him to, like, yeah, he might be pissed off that day, but I don't think he's going to like, I'd be pretty surprised like that if he changed and went somewhere else, like he's there and set up his main scrape for a reason. And like, if he is a really good buck, like he's mainly probably set that main scrape up on a spot that's probably been, used for years and years as main scrapes by previous bucks before him. So, I mean, even if he did piss off, he's probably going to be replaced by another pretty handy buck. But yeah, I don't think like, it's pretty interesting, like how sort of, I guess like if you do things time and time again, like if you're in there every day with a chainsaw cutting firewood and stuff, like then maybe that, but like going in there once, clearing a couple of lanes, it might literally take like 15 minutes, like move sort of the brush into like a pretty discreet sort of situation and stuff. Like obviously don't put the branch onto his scrape or whatever. I think we sometimes like underemphasize sometimes the impacts that we cause on animals, but then overemphasize it in other ways. And I think in this circumstance, I think you'd be pretty right to get in there in the middle of the day, cut a couple of branches down, even potentially clear them away or use them to set up a blind for your son. And like, honestly, I don't think it'll make much of an impact. And I think definitely bucks too. They're probably the most forgiving of them all, especially when it comes to this time of year, like during the rut, they're definitely honed in on those girls. So yeah, if you are clearing a few lanes around a scrape and stuff like that, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah. See, this one's an interesting topic because I personally would go about it like pretty similarly, but I wouldn't be personally going in there in April and doing that. I'd be hunting it and making the most of my situation. If I happen to hunt it and he's not there, I would be with the handsaw, just removing any branches while he's not there, hoping that it's going to rain and reduce, obviously our scent and things like that. Because I, on the contrary to what James says, do think that these big bucks, especially the older animals, are a bit more switched on to the point where they are more receptive to human influence. And especially you might be solely focusing on the buck, but if you're in there with a chainsaw disrupting the does, they might be like, yeah, no, I'm not that keen. Again, if it was Feb, March and you've got a month before they start rutting, that's obviously enough time for him to come back and refamiliarize if it is a one-off event. But purely because it is now April, I would be looking to do the least invasive method possible. So that's where I would be, Again, if you're using a chainsaw to cut shooting lanes, it's like, how big is your shooting lane need to be? Personally, I'd actually rather a little bit of cover to get in there, and I'd rather just go along a game trail and snip every single branch with a sort of handsaw or secateurs and make my approach quieter so that I can get into 20 meters and not be seen, and then have a smaller shooting lane rather than going, need a chainsaw to really get in there and make it super open or anything like that. I just think a chainsaw is going to be a little bit excessive, to be honest. But again, if it's the benefit of getting in there, cutting 10 branches in 5 minutes and then getting out, who's to say that might be better than being in there cutting 50 branches with a handsaw and spreading your scent around for an hour. So there's no right or wrong answer for this sort of question. And a lot of these questions, it's just experience. And that's where, you just live and learn with all these sort of things. Like, as we've found, there's no right or wrong to the previous question, and then there's no right or wrong to this question. But obviously, we hope that the young fella comes along and obviously has a bit of a shooting lane to have a look and see Dad hopefully nail this beautiful buck. But yeah, it'll be interesting. It's one of those things that unless you do or don't do something, you won't actually know and be able to experience it for next time. So got to love the variability of hunting. Know where you stand with Onyx, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts. featuring land ownership maps that works offline, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilize OnX while hunting in the United States on James's elk hunt of a lifetime. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts allowed us to go farther and hunt with confidence.
The next question got sent in by Jacob Duran. So Jacob asks, what sight do you guys use? I have a 5-pin sight and I find it really difficult to look through it with all the pins being so close together. Can you please help?
So Jacob's talking here about bows, obviously, because he's mentioned pins and things. We have always run previously like the Spot Hog sights, and more recently, I know James still to this day actually uses a Fast Eddy, which the benefit of Spot Hog sights is that these are again like mostly what we call single pins, so one pin that comes up in the sight housing. With Spot Hog, they have what we call vertical aligned pins. So if you imagine like a circle, and then from the bottom of, on a clock, for example, number 6, a pin comes up to the middle of the clock, or that clock hand starts at the bottom of the 6 and comes up to the middle, and then there's a fiber optic pin. With the Fast Eddy, it's actually got 2 fiber optics on that same vertical alignment, and the benefit to that is it gives you, like, for example, what we use it for, because we like to get nice and close and shoot close distances. James shoots it at like 20 or 25 meters and 30 meters or 35 meters, for example. So it gives you, without having to move your sight, do anything like that, you can shoot 20 to 30 meters very effectively. The added benefit of the Spot Hog Fast Eddy, as we were alluding to, is that it's what we call a single pin sight, which means that with our sight tapes, we can basically move with a little dial. Say there's a deer bedded at 66 meters and we know that we can shoot that. It's absolutely perfect. We wanted to actually, in fact, shoot that. As long as we've got our sight tape dialed and we've got a marker for, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, all these type of things, they can be as specific as exact meterage. So 66 yards, there could be like a little indicator. We can dial that, and then that single pin now becomes 20 to 60 meters. We put that pin on the deer, on its heart, and shoot it. So that's the benefit of a single pin, especially those Fast Eddies. I've recently, personally converted to the option sights. I'm running a 4S sight, which for me just gives me the added versatility of the fixed pin sight. So the 4S, which I've discussed that I'm using at the moment, basically when I say option, it gives you the option of a single pin or a fixed pin. So their sight, if you imagine, literally just has a single pin on it, and then you can flip out, almost like a wallet, flip out the front of the sight, and it removes or adds 3 other pins. So when you've got the 4S, there's 4 pins. You've got 3 fixed pins and then a movable slider pin. So again, that movable slider pin, you're using a sight tape, and you can go from 1 meter all the way down to 100 or 120 if it fits on your sight, if your bow is fast enough to shoot those distances. The only real difference here is that the option sight gives you a lot of the benefits of the Spot Hog systems, just that you've also got fixed pins, so that if I'm doing a calling situation, for example, and again, this is where the benefit of the Spot Hog Fast Eddy comes in, because you do have a 20 and a 30 pin. It's given you the 2 fiber optics, but a lot of the old single pin sights only gave you 1 fiber optic. So if you set your pin to 20 and then that animal runs in and then runs out and stops at 30 or 40, you've got to sort of pin shoot and guess the gap or the meterage, which can make things a little bit less accurate. It's a lot more from the hip, and can result in poor shots, obviously. Whereas with the option sight, if I'm doing a calling situation, what I'll do is I'll call, say, to a big roaring red stag, and hopefully he'll come into 20 meters, and I've got my fixed pin at 20, 30, and 40 with that 4S. So I've got 3 options there. If he stops at 20, I'm going to shoot him with my top pin. If he stops at 30, I'll shoot him with my second pin, and so forth. But what I can also do is, say I sneak up over a hill and I've got a red deer feeding at 30 meters, and as Jacob's alluded to, I don't want the clutter of 3 pins on my sight, or 4 with my sliding pin. I'll flip that housing out the front, get it out of the way completely, dial my slide to the exact range. So say I've ranged this red stag feeding at 33 meters. I'll dial my single movable pin to 33 meters, draw back and shoot him through the heart or lungs, and have him go down with one single pin on that animal. The only important difference is that I guess there's a horizontal stacking of these pins rather than vertical, as we discussed with the spot hog systems. So what I will say is that is important, because if you are someone that shoots a little bit far back off that front leg, one of the benefits of the spot hog system is that you can line your pin up directly with the front leg, go up a third of the body height of the animal and shoot. And that's most of the time putting you in the heart and lungs. Whereas if you want to shoot with the horizontal stacking pins of the option sight and you find it difficult to come up that front leg because now your pin is horizontally aligned, it just makes it sometimes a little bit harder if you're not as diligent and not as good with your anatomy and your aiming and things. And that's purely just like a psychological standpoint. The sights, I guess, don't actually factor in the human error, but that is just something to consider. Again, there's so much involved with sights and things like this and what you're putting on your bow, but these are just some things that we've obviously taken into account with years of experience.
Alrighty, team. Well, hopefully you've taken something away from that butchering podcast and you've learnt something, or you've refined your process, whether it be with the equipment that you use, the method that you use, or just how you go about even cryovacking or using freezer bags and preparing the meat for loved ones, whether you're giving away to family and friends or the mother-in-law. So we're just going to jump into a few housekeeping things as always. As you're listening to this, obviously it's the fallow deer and red deer raw. The rut is happening in full swing, so hopefully you guys are listening to this on the way out to a hunt. We will be dropping podcasts every week during this period, so we've pre-recorded a couple here now that you guys can be listening to. Ayden and I will be mainly chasing reds, but also a couple of fallow. So stay tuned for some YouTube content on that in the future. But we're also going to be dropping some semi-live hunt podcasts where we'll, be out in the field and do some recordings of our hunts while we're out there in hunting camp that we'll bring to you as sort of bonus episodes, I guess, where we'll share our experiences, things that we've learned, hopefully a bit of success. And, share, essentially bring you guys along for the story and as if you were in hunting camp with us. So stay tuned for those in coming weeks. And hopefully we'll be able to tell you about all the critters that we've got amongst.
Alrighty, if you've missed it, we launched our 20k YouTube subscriber giveaway a couple of weeks ago now, and it's in full swing. Thank you very much to everyone who's already entered. We've been loving reading through the comments and seeing all the amazing hunts that people want to go on. There's some over in Europe and all these countries in the Middle East for ibex and things like that. There's so many coming in for, what we've got here in Australia: roaring red stags, croaking fallow bucks, buffalo and bangtang hunts, as well as a ton of stuff over in the US from grizzly bears, moose and elk. So the diversity of these hunts that you guys are sending in that you guys want to do is absolutely amazing. It's really cool seeing as well of all the people that you want to go and share these hunts with. We're getting heaps of people saying, like my old man who got me into hunting, and we can obviously resonate with that. So I will say that this giveaway that we're doing is our biggest as of yet. It's something that we're going to hopefully just keep building on. But as of right now, you can win thousands of dollars worth of prizes from some of the most generous brands who support us. We're giving away a pair of brand new lower boots, the Lower Ranger GTX 3s, which James and I have been running now for years and years. As we just touched on in that FAQ, I've been shooting the Option 4S sight, and we're giving away one of those from Option Archery. James has thrown in one of his Dragonfly knives from Day 6 Gear, which is a beautifully little handcrafted sort of solid piece knife that fits really nicely in your hands and is razor sharp. So that's going to benefit someone. The legends over at Cayuga Broadheads have thrown in some broadheads and apparel. We've got a care package from brands such as OzCaf Energy, Atlas Wild, Dog and Gun Coffee. All of those amazing brands are hooking us up with their supplements, their caffeine pouches, their coffee, as I said. Everything hydration related or something that you can put in your mouth and drink is coming to us from them. Kimbo Australia is donating a rolling knife sharpener. And then, as to be expected, the legends over at Venture Hunting Outdoors are throwing in some gear. So again, this giveaway is going to be amazing. We are getting plenty of comments. The subscribers are rising and we're getting closer every day to 20,000 YouTube subscribers. So to enter, simply head to our YouTube channel, find the pinned giveaway video. It's basically the 2025 bow hunting highlight reel from our Northern Territory adventures where we're hunting bang-tang boars and buffaloes. Go ahead and like the video for one. We don't just put that content out for no reason. We hope you guys are enjoying it. But from there, simply like the video, comment on the video and tell us your dream hunt in 25 words or less. There's plenty of examples of other people's hunts. So yeah, if you see something that you like and go, geez, I want to do that too, simply, add your own variation of that. And then lastly, please make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. That's the whole point of this. We're trying to get to 20,000 YouTube subscribers. And as always, this has been years and years in the making. I can still remember when it was called, Doumtsis photography or something like that, or a Doumtsis photography 15 years ago when I was just a young fella putting videos up, and, it's obviously transitioned to everything that it is today. So something that James and I are obviously very, very proud of. And again, it wouldn't be possible without all of your ongoing support.
If you guys haven't already checked out, make sure to jump over to our website and check out all the prints that we've got available. So we've had endless messages. We've had a few orders now. People absolutely loving the quality of the prints. People sending us how they're getting them for their study or their office. They're getting them framed. They look absolutely incredible. So make sure to jump over and check out the prints. We've got them in a couple of different sizes. There's over 40 to different types of prints to choose from. So whether you want to do, a couple of different deer species, whether you want to do, a Northern Territory theme or a US theme, there's wildlife themes, there's definitely a print for everyone. So if you're looking for a personal one for your office or a potential gift idea, make sure to jump over on the website and check that out, and just support Ayden and I by grabbing one of those prints.
The last thing from me, please continue to subscribe, review and rate this podcast. James and I are putting plenty of work in, doing lots of collating from all of our experience over the years to try and bring you guys the topics that we think are going to be most relevant to you as we sort of build on this. We figured that obviously last week's podcast after the shot was a good one to bring in, with people hopefully having a bit more success over the coming weeks. And then obviously this butchering one is, flowing on from that. And then spoiler alert, next week we will be doing diseases in wild pigs and deer. So we're going to be jumping into basically risk prevention and how freezing and cooking methods can largely make our meat safe. We're going to debunk a lot of myths about all this wild game. There certainly are risks, but I think there's a stigma attached to wild game that's probably not fair, not representative of just how good it can be if you do, take considerations to remove those risks. So again, we appreciate the support we're getting on this podcast and how quickly it's becoming, one of your favorite platforms, across the social media banner that is Twin Elements. We're getting our knowledge out to you guys through this, and we're finding it really, one, immersive, but also like the engagement through the FAQs and stuff. Like I can't tell you how many messages we're getting each day from keen hunters and keen outdoor enthusiasts saying, hey, I listened to your podcast and thank you so much for that after the shot one, because I came to think of it about this and that happened. And, I'm now eating wild game meat, hopefully, because you guys gave me a little bit of a pep talk as to it's not that bad and scary. You just got to get more experience with it and take the right precautions. So again, that's all from me. Thank you guys so much. We're really keen to keep going with this podcast and looking forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, legends, and we'll talk to you soon on the Twin Elements podcast.